Welcome back to everyone. Our students were away on travel week last week, so they're also back and looking more refreshed than we are. But today is our first interdisciplinary panel, and it's going to be informal. It's a way for us to really zone in on our agricultural plant inventory and identify promising crops that we're going to develop into dyes or building materials, and also relate it to the larger issues that are happening around global mamas, equilibrium in the region. So welcome. I just want to quickly introduce everybody, very quick. Renee, everyone knows from Global Mamas. She's the founder of Global Mamas, which is a circular textile enterprise in Ghana that is fair trade and produces a fantastic range of products. And they've just launched their fair trade center in the eastern region in Ghana. Dita Zakova, who's the founder of Equilibri. Hey, Dita. Everyone here knows her, but for those who don't, she's the founder of Equilibri, has done a wonderful range of work with women and communities across Guatemala, around Lake Atitlan, and a number of really key research projects that look at material responsibility in the region. Then we have Krili Carr, who is one of the co-architects for the Fair Trade Zone, also from Renee's team in Ghana, a landscape architect based between Vienna and Ghana. Sasha Duer, everybody might remember from a couple weeks ago, our leading bio-based dyes expert, and she led a wonderful workshop here. I also forgot to bring your books, which she's gifted to the class. I'll bring that next week. Deshawn Harris, hey, I don't see Nadine on yet. Actually, no, she is. Hey, Nadine. Hey, two amazing power folk here in New Haven and who've been running the Armory Gardens. I don't know if some of you have been involved with the Armory. And so they grow a range of amazing plants, and they do a ton of projects in New Haven that we'll hear about eventually. Anyone? Oh, Juan Skinner, who you guys remember from the presentation on Equilibri as well.
Hello.
Hi, Juan. Nice to see you again. Juan is, among many other things, someone who really understands the plant ecology and broader architectural systems from bio-based materials in Guatemala. So welcome back, Juan. Nice to see you.
Hi, thank you.
Hey. So we have a number of student presentations that we're just gonna go through very quickly to activate a series of discussion questions. The students may expand upon this as well. So they're going to present in groups of 4. I think there are 3 to 4 people in each group. And we'll kick off with the first group of 3, and they're going to be talking about a range of crops and their life cycles. And we hope that this will open up a conversation around soil health and cash crops. So Abby, I'm going to pass this over to you. So 3 minutes, guys, not longer, so that we have like 15 minutes for discussion with our guests as well. All right. Oh, wow. The whole screen went. Okay.
Is this the Zoom?
Yeah, it shouldn't have. Okay, perfect. Yeah. Do you see that? So you know what? Just follow my screen. I'm going to pan through here.
Okay. Yeah, apologies for the format on Zoom. It's wrapping around the theme lab, but so I decided to focus on 2 out of the 3 sisters, Maze and Tommy Bean. I guess like kind of my focus for this study was like I was interested in like how they literally grow together and how like the bean kind of uses the corn as like a method for its growth.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of what this like long drawing is depicting, and also how important they are for like milpa intercropping and subsistence agriculture in Guatemala. And families kind of are able to grow these on like a smaller scale, and the planting is staggered. So normally like the bean will create like its fruit before corn, but obviously these are also usually planted with multiple other crops that I didn't get into this assignment. So that's kind of what this is diagramming, and kind of slowly diagramming the multiple periods of growth from like the little seedlings, and how the bean kind of slowly make its way up the maize stalk.
Okay. I'm panning through it.
Yeah.
And guys, if you have a mural board link, feel free to zoom in. Okay. So how long does it take to grow the pods? Do you know how many months?
Not very long. I think like they're usually planted in kind of late spring, early summer, and I want to say, gosh, I don't remember
Late
off the top
summer.
of my head,
Okay.
but like midsummer or so.
So a
And then
couple,
the
2 to 3
corn,
months.
yeah, and then the maize is usually harvested like late summer into the fall. So there's a bit of a staggering, and obviously like the maize creates much more like crop residues than the bean plant, just given the scale of the crop itself.
Mm-hmm.
And maize is like pretty primary to people's diets too, and is like used in a pretty wide variety of ways. And currently, like burning is a pretty common tactic to like get rid of a lot of these. But I know like there's also obviously research as a substrate for biomaterials, and kind of wondering like, can beans also, like how can that crop residue be integrated into potential like bio-based products? Like could it be used as a dye, like because it has like these beautiful colors, like based off of our like bio dye, especially like the flowers that are produced before the bean grows. So could lead to some interesting experiments.
Fantastic. Yeah. All right, thank you, Abby. And we're going to jump straight into Veronica.
Sure. Yeah, my drawing's a little smaller, but for the first part, in the Notha cycle, I highlighted the controlled burns that starts the process of restoring nutrients to fields. So it breaks down the organic matter and then returns some of the nutrients from the forest into the soil, which is then useful for growing new crops. And then in the Notha cycle, Abby talked about growing beans with corn, and that is also useful for creating usable nitrogen for the plant. So often for growing corn, if you're not growing it with beans, you will have to add a kind of nitrogen fertilizer to bring nutrients to the corn. And then it needs like irrigation and fairly moist soil, wind pollination, and then after about 3 to 5 months, you can harvest it, restore leaves to the soil, or like kind of some of the stopover soil amendment. And then you're left with a pretty big mass of residues, which can require cleaning and sorting. And then I listed the various possibilities for what can be done with the residues, which includes like fodder and bedding or soil amendment, and then some stuff like biofuel, paper, wallboard, rayon, bioplastics are also applicable, but they require a lot of processing and chemicals. So I think they're pretty high energy, but obviously they're not based in like fossil fuels to the same extent. And then the second crop I chose was manioc, which I know is also called cassava, and that was part of the Guatemala group, but it was one of the milpa crops. in pre-Columbian times, and it's native to South and Central America. And it's a perennial plant and requires significantly less maintenance, and it grows pretty well in like kind of droughty, acidic soils. So it's a good crop for kind of marginal areas. Also grows with vegetative reproduction, so just like cuttings. And then it grows for like a year to 2 years before harvest. And then I think at 9 months you can prune it, but it's like very low maintenance. But it's not something that you can, from what I understand, you can't really cash crop it because it can take whatever nutrients out of the soil that are there. So you have to rotate the planting of cassava.
Fantastic. Okay. Thanks so much, Veronica and Ariel.
And for this last part of the group, I'm kind of building off both Abby and Veronica. We're looking at the intercropping system that Abby was talking about, and I'm quoting here the Three Sisters Indigenous Peoples Method of America. It was using corn to provide support for the beans, and the beans provide nitrogen through some bacteria that live on the roots. But then the squash, which is the last part of the Three Sisters, and pumpkins, they provided ground cover to suppress weeds and inhibit evaporation from the soil. So that's where I'm looking at, and specifically I'm looking at coffee and squash, where coffee here, we can see, is the way they grow it is like they put like some of the coffee beans and to the soil, and the bud grows in like 1.5 months and sprouts and transplanted into a field in our more common practices for 4 to 6 months until it finally flowers and grows the coffee cherries in the 20th month. And then it takes like another 4 months to ripen and harvest. Until then, you can start to harvest the coffee flowers. And as you can see on the right diagram, which is the cherry and the embedded coffee bean within. And so here is the problem where you only extract the coffee beans, but then the cherries itself with the skins and the flesh inside, it's often like the byproduct of this industrial process. So towards the right side of the screen, there's how the byproducts can often be used as fertilizer, which is the, I guess, like obvious way to go. But the pellets is how you would often compress these byproducts, including some of the beans that might not meet some standards, and this could become like biofuel for other energy purposes. But also one interesting thing is the plastic polymer that some of the Columbia's researchers are doing in order to reduce the amount of plastic that is being used, and this becomes like a building product that is interestingly made of coffee. But the second part is the squash on the right side here, where again this provides protection from weeds for the intercropping and sprouting and germination, and flowers within 6 weeks, and it fruits out in summer. So this is like a much faster product, and they would harvest squash, and there's more fruit, more use of it beyond just eating it, but also beans and in pharmaceutics, because there's a lot of antioxidant certain orange colors in the organic colors.
Fantastic. Okay, so we're going to open it up for discussions. And Abby, I don't know if you want to ask our first question, which is literally right here. I believe in you. Okay.
It's just like to the, okay, sorry. This is for Juan, Nadine, and Ishwan. What does soil health mean to you over the years? What are the most pressing challenges facing soil practices of cash crops in Ghana, Guatemala, or New Haven?
Hi, yes, I don't know much about Ghana. I know more about agriculture here in Mesoamerica, the Mesoamerican cultural region.
Yes.
And I think the greatest challenges, if you want to know about cash crops, export crops, or also traditional crops. You said
So cash crops.
cash crops. Cash
Corn.
crops varied a lot.
And
Yes, cash crops varied a lot. The south coast of just off the lake basin here towards the Pacific we used to be a cotton growing area, and they really pour a lot of DDT on it, uh, it to a point where women in that region was within one of the 3 areas in the world with greater DDT content in breast milk. And that now there is a sugar cane with Sri Lanka in the cotton coast of Peru. And that was in the 60s and 70s. Then it changed to sugarcane and now to palm oil. It's the latest plantation agriculture in the region. We have a problem with sugarcane. They burn it before harvesting to make it more comfortable. And that creates a lot of pollution, a lot of carbon dioxide. And also we have airborne DDT coming into the lake, and we are seeing in ecotoxicology studies that DDT increases in fish and edible snails that grow in the lake and crabs. So that's the greater problem. And also in subsistence crops, small farmers, we have also problems with pesticides using first generation organochlorinated pesticides and phosphorus-based organophosphorate pesticides. Except in the plantation crops, the banana plantations are also in the south coast are controlled because now there's the technology to control residues from those pesticides, so they don't use them anymore, and they have changed the technology to more biological controls. Otherwise, Guatemala can lose the amount of bananas that can export. But the problem is in the subsistence crops and the crops that produce, like vegetable crops that are consuming the country, don't have any controls of use of pesticides, and pesticides have killed reduced the soil ecology greatly, and therefore it disturbed the nutrient cycles and has made soils addicted to synthetic fertilizers, which all are washed into the lake. And like the creeks, in the last 20 years, the creeks and rivers that run in the lake basin towards the lake have practically eliminated all living beings. The ecology is completely destroyed. And that's the greatest problem in subsistence crops. And like what you were talking about, mostly corn, that is the main subsistence crop, was domesticated by Mayans that predominate in the night. We have 95% indigenous Maya people in the basin. And then we don't have much problems with physical problems with soil tillage, because everything is non-tilled in the area. Since this mountains area is very steep, and soil erosion, Mayan people has been growing corn or maize here in the area for more than 2,000 years. And the systems of preventing soil erosion are very good compared to terraces that build too much weight when they water them, and they can collapse. There is irrigation agriculture in terraces, but in very specific geologic areas that retain the water and resist they are almost carved into rock, the terraces that are irrigated in the slopes around the basin. I don't know what else to tell you.
No, that's a whole host of challenges, and we're taking note, all of which are interconnected. Maybe because either, Deshawn, Nadine, or Dr. Boa, who just joined, I don't know if you can speak to, what soil health means to you, and what are the greatest challenges you're encountering in your respective practices around soil conservation?
I can speak. This is Nadine. So we run a community garden. It's the Armory Community Garden. We've been around for about 6 years. So we don't do any cash crops. We grow to basically feed community. But we are located right next to a historic armory and also a regional carceral facility, so a correctional facility, the Whaley Avenue Jail. And that armory has been around for well over 100 years. So the lot, when we got it, the ground itself, it had a lot of remnants of whatever was on the roof of the armory that used to just blow down onto the ground. And in that area, it's a huge lot. It takes about 2/3 of the block. So it's basically the parking garage, the correctional facility, the armory, and then we are the big green space, the rest of that block. So whatever was floating around or running off of the roof of the armory was going into the soil. So when we first got the space, we knew we couldn't grow directly into the soil because we had no idea what the soil was like. We didn't do any soil testing. We just knew we can't grow directly into the soil. So we grow from raised beds, and we've been doing that since the very beginning. So our challenge was getting soil. Again, we're a community garden. We fall under Gather New Haven, which is a nonprofit that runs well over 50 community gardens throughout the city of New Haven. But it's a nonprofit, which means there's not inherently a lot of money. So our challenge was getting organic soil into the garden. We also grow organic, and this was, I don't think this was by choice. We just never use any pesticides or chemicals to help us grow. But getting that bagged soil, which can be expensive, and we need a lot of it because we have a lot of beds, that was our challenge. And we were fortunate enough to get some grants to get us initially set up with that soil, to make sure that we were able to grow properly. Then gradually, as we started to go along as a garden, we started doing some composting. We have 3 big bays now that we compost in. So learning how to compost properly and then use that compost to amend our beds and things like that, rotating the crops so we're not, overgrowing in certain beds over and over with the same crop. We don't practice no-till, but I would say we do low-till with the beds because we do turn them over at the end of the season. But basically the biggest challenges is, and we sit literally in the middle of a neighborhood. So we are inner city, we sit in the middle of a neighborhood and making sure we have enough soil each season. And then we were fortunate enough, and this is something that was worked out and is not that common with most community gardens where the city provides water, because again, we're going off the armory's water supply. So we don't have to worry about water, but we're at the mercy of the city when they decide to turn the water on and off. They've been very good with us. But again, our challenge is growing in those raised beds and keeping that soil, getting that soil every season to make sure we have enough, because naturally over seasons, the soil compresses, it goes down. And then we have to fill up those beds over and over each season. We have well over probably 25 beds, something like that, and we're building more. So just keeping the soil supplied is our biggest challenge at our garden.
Thank you, Nadine. Wow. It's crazy to think about roofs being a source of pollution on the soils surrounding the building. But thank you for that. I think that lends a very direct link to the materials we build with. And I'm going to quickly pass the torch to Dr. Boa because he has terrible signal, and I know he just joined again. Dr. Boa, are you able to hear us and connect? Okay. All right.
Yes.
Oh, I can hear you.
It's on now. I don't know what is happening to me.
Welcome. No, we totally understand. Ghanaian internet is better than. Were you able to hear the question? I think we just lost him again. Okay. Dr. Boa, feel free to chime in. We will move on, but hopefully as soon as you're back, we can link you into the conversation. Okay. We're going to move on very quickly unless there are like some really key questions, but I think some themes are going to keep coming up. Any burning questions before?
I have a quick question, Mae-ling.
Yes, so,
I just wondered where, Nadine, where do you
hello now,
get your,
can you hear me?
oh, sorry.
Hello,
Hi, Dr. Boa, can you hear us?
hello, Mae-ling,
Yes.
hello,
Okay.
yes, I can hear you. I'm having a terrible time here. Yes,
So Dr. Boa, can you tell us a little bit about no-till agriculture and your biggest challenges? Oh boy. Okay. Anna, go right ahead. We'll figure out how to get Dr. Boa on board.
I just had a quick question for Nadine because believe it or not, my internet also in Boston has been coming in and out. Just a quick question for Nadine, which is that where are you getting your, what are your principal sources for relying on soil replenishment at the moment for the urban gardens?
So right now we get our,
muted.
we get our supplies through through Gather and Home
I'm
Depot.
so sorry.
I'm gonna stop talking because as soon as he can get in, we need to let him speak.
Yeah.
I don't think that's going to happen. So continue, Nadine. I will figure a way. Maybe I can even link him on my cell phone. So go ahead.
Okay, so we get our soil from Gather New Haven because that we fall under them. And then we buy the bags of soil from Home Depot. And again, those bags have fluctuated in price. Sometimes we can catch them on sale, but they're expensive because we use organic soil for raised beds and we need literally pallets full. So they can get really expensive. And because they have over, 50 gardens that they have to supply, not every garden gets soil every time. Now, last year we were fortunate and we worked with Bell Nurseries, which is a local nursery here in North Haven, and we got soil from them. But literally, the gardens rotate off in terms of need. So last season we got soil. This season we're fortunate to get soil, but next season we may not. And that's how all the gardens kind of rotate. So we have to make do with what we have. That's why compost is really important, so we can kind of supplement the soil that we have and make do.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
All right. All right. Dr. Boa will try and call us at some point. So we'll move on, and I'm sure we can bring up the question of what soil health means and no tillage very, very soon. All right. Second group, Christina. Want to kick it off?
Yes,
Hey.
I'm right here. I chose pineapple and plantain because they're both yellow. But also because both of them work really well with propagation technique. So right after harvesting, there's always like really quickly a new cycle of growth through propagation. And their life cycle, both of them, is kind of like, I guess it makes more sense to start with harvesting. After harvesting the fruit, both plants go through the propagation process where like for pineapples, the crowns are taken out of the soil and placed upside down. So the roots and the fibers can be sterilized by the sun. And for the plantain, the suckers from the roots of the trees are taken out and cut to prepare for a new planting. And in both cases, the plants go through, after being put into soil, they grow really quickly. Usually for pineapples, they're ready to harvest in a 20-week cycle. 20 weeks is the longest time it takes for them to mature. And for pineapple, for plantains, the harvest cycle is usually within a year. But usually one plant can grow multiple suckers, so multiple trees would sprout and they grow in different cycles. So there's almost a continuous cycle of harvesting for plantains, and they grow year round with warm temperature and good rainfall. But pineapples can only grow, I think, 5 to 7 months every year in Ghana. And both plants have really great and obvious food applications. Pineapple is one of the biggest horticultural export of Ghana. The special use for pineapple is the pineapple vinegar. Pineapple peels can be used to create vinegar with antioxidant properties. And for plantain, worth mentioning is important common dish in the Ghanaian cuisine or the whole Western Africa cuisine is made from plantain, cassava, and water. So it can be made fresh from plantain, but also sold as packaged food. So it also has a long life for food. And non-food applications, pineapples have really a lot of different use. For like, it can be used actually surprisingly as an absorbent of heavy metal ions to use to clear contamination. And pineapple leaves make great fibers and dyes and weaving materials. And the plantains are a good source of compost, nutritions, and also in cosmetics, it's used a lot because it promotes healing and speed up cell regeneration. It sounds like a marketing scheme, but it does in a lot of local culture. Direct use of plantain is like a skincare treatment, and also it can be used potentially for fiber, but there's some barriers in the processing and service industry in Ghana, because actually the difference between pineapples and plantains is that pineapples are usually grown in large scale by large places, and plantains are actually 90% of plantains are grown with smallholder farms. So there's some barrier in scale about fiber production and like post processing of the two plants.
Fantastic. Thank you. All right, who's this? Peter.
Yes, I was also looking at pineapples at the start, and mostly looking at the products that can come out of them, because of the propagation technique used. They're taking those suckers off the stem, and then per acre, there's something like 20 to 20,000 tons of leaf waste once the leaves are overturned, and that isn't. A lot of times that's just burned as waste. So the fibers from that, there's a couple different ways to treat them. They can be like very, very like they hand treated, like in the top right up there, where they're made into fabric or textiles. And then they can also be, there have been a couple of composite materials made out of them, but it's pretty hard once you get the fibers apart because they're very waxy. So, and then when those are made into composite materials, that's using petroleum-based resins anyway. But it's offsetting what you would otherwise use within those. So that's for the leaves, and then for the rest of the plant, for assuming it's being produced and reduced fruits. That's about 25% per fruit of waste mass in like between the crown and the core and the rest. Sometimes the juices from that, because it's so high sugar, that's processed into either vinegar, or it can be both the juices and the peels, because the peels are pretty high carbohydrates, so it's just more complex sugar. That can be broken down into bioethanol in just like a long fermentation process.
Yeah. All right, thank you, Peter. And Owen.
So I looked into beans and aloe vera. So in the first one of the tree slide, farmers will keep these little coffee plants in nurseries. Then about after 5 to 6 months, the small trees are moved out of the nurseries and planted across the farms. And it takes about 3 to 4 years for the flower to first come out. And after about 8 weeks of pollination, the green fruit that will grow in here. The coffee beans are, as we know, are actually seeds from the inside of the cherries, which are the size of a gooseberry grape. So the coffee's fruit sting is called cascara, which has been consumed as a food infusion. So it's used as a tea for centuries, actually, in coffee drinks. And there is caffeine in it. And coffee's pulp can be used for bio components and animal feed. There's this thing called silverskin. It's used as fuel and for soil fertilization. So on the image on the right, you can see there's so many layers of this cherry, and each layer can be used for different things. So, and for aloe vera, it's very easy to grow. As soon as contact with a moist, warm soil, it germinates. They're not afraid of drought, but they're afraid of cold. So as long as temperatures never dip below freezing for extended periods.
Oh no, I don't know what to do.
Sorry, Dr. Boa, we can hear you. Owen is just wrapping up.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh. Okay, I'll do quick. Great. So aloe flowers are a byproduct, providing a valuable source of bioactive compounds with different functions for health benefits. And bagasse, it's also another byproduct of aloe processing leaves, and can be used for extracting phenolic and aqueous, which is used for antioxidant and antifungal purpose in this crops.
Fantastic. Thank you, Owen. Very succinct. Okay, Chia, that'll be the last one in this group.
Yeah. So I looked at avocado first, and they actually take quite a long time to grow. If you start from a seed, it could take up to 30 years.
Coming on and off.
Okay. But if you start from seedling, it's usually 3 to 4 years that you could have like avocado fruit from the tree. And I specifically looked into like the soil system or the root system of the avocado tree, and they often use a drop irrigation system to feed the water that's being pumped up usually from the aquifer or like a lake. And the root system like extends very deep and very far. So usually you would grow trees that are 30 feet apart, and they can extend down to like 11, 12 feet. And they like poor soil layers, so they will try to avoid compact soils and go much deeper in the ground. And yeah, so after harvest, it goes into like the cycle of going to the manufacturer, being washed, packaged, maybe shipped overseas or locally distributed. And along the process, if they're making avocado oil, they're only using the meat of the avocado. So peels and seeds are being discarded often, and the alternative ways to reuse these materials, a lot of them are used in cosmetics. such as the extract of avocado oil, and they contain like high vitamin A, E, D, and it could be the pit could be used as biodegradable packaging or plastic. This company called Bioface, they developed a way to use the pit and turn into cutlery and food packaging that has like 1 year shelf time. And another example that I found is called Material. They did these testing of using the pit and mold it to seed and powder, and then we mold into like these objects or yeah. Next, I look at rice, and they have a much shorter growing time, from 90 to 150 days, and mainly
I
like
might have to stop because it's,
Sorry, and it would go about like 3 stages, basically like from seed to seedling, and growing into the vegetative stage, and the third is flowering, and like you have um, the rice that ready to mature, and the alternative ways of using rice is rice husk ash. It's already being widely used. It's a substitute, cement substitute for concrete making, and you could also use the husk for to make sustainable decking panels. This brand called, or I'm not sure if it's a brand or name, called Resista. Yeah, and it has the texture that feels like wood. And also this project that I found by artist Being Cho, she used rice husk to make these small molds into like children's game board ish.
Huh.
Yeah. So
Okay. Thank you, Gia. So I'm going to open up the question to Anna Maria, who's here, because we've gone through some really interesting crops that are common, between both Ghana and Guatemala. So, thinking about the existing African and South American crop inventories, as results of centuries of plant immigration, exchange, survival, and adaptation. I was wondering if you could speak to some of the historical and contemporary agroecology practices in the region that offer promising avenues for scaling agriculture or their byproducts alongside protecting soil and forestry ecosystems.
Sure, my obsession. We also brought a fiber for you, an Amazonian one.
Oh,
This is
wow.
chambira. So you want to pass it around and touch it. It's one of the many palm tree natural fibers that you find in the region. And I guess that it was interesting for me to see pineapple because it is an Amazonian plant originally, just like cacao. It's Amazonian. Most think it's an Mesoamerican cultivar, but much older seeds have been found in archaeological sites in Amazonia, thousands of years older. So now we know it's Amazonian. And then, of course, aloe vera, we have it everywhere. Coffee came from the Middle East. Avocados are Mesoamerican. It's just the Colombian exchange. It's fascinating. Plantains, I believe, came from Africa.
Yeah.
And manioc is everywhere now, but manioc is the Amazonian staple crop.
Yeah.
So it's just super interesting to see how the tropics through colonization have become a common ground. But the polycultures of Amazonia are extremely complex. I would say that You could imagine the milpa is complex in itself, but it's already a simplified, very synthetic version of a much more complex system that you find in the region. So right now, for example, for studio, my students are looking at 75 species that are commonly used in the chakras or the polycultures of Amazonia. But let's say that a typical chakra generally has about 50 useful species, between those that are edible, some that are used for construction purposes, others that are used for medicinal purposes, and of course others that are used for fibers, for all sorts of cultural objects and expressions. And I guess that what concerns me is that I don't think that Amazonian culture lacks the knowledge, neither from the point of the ecology, because it's really, they're building ecologies. I think that looking at crops in an isolated way in Amazonia wouldn't make very much sense, because they're always thinking in terms of their interrelationships, because they're literally planting about 50 to 75 of them. So the way in which they relate to each other and with animals would definitely be part of this equation, because very often, for example, the animals are the ones who plant. There are certain seeds that need to go through the digestive system of certain animals to be able to germinate. So if animals are not included in the planting equation, probably the chakra would work. So it feels like it's a much more complex ecology that involves several quote unquote crops and animals as well. For me, the main challenge that we are encountering is not reviving or revitalizing ancestral knowledge that is still alive, but in very many places has been damaged, if you wish, because the government has been telling Amazonians to plant pastures and to plant cash crops. Almost like, the deforest to claim policy phenomenon in Latin America, where the government, from the state perspective, couldn't see the forest as a productive cultivation area. So they would say, okay, this area is not productive, so you either produce or we're going to take it away from you. And for the government, producing was either having livestock or having monocrops. So many indigenous cultures abandoned their traditional systems in order not to lose their lands and favored cash crops, which are, as like in Guatemala, what I heard from Guatemala is exactly the same in the Amazon. They're using lots of agrochemicals, fertilizers that completely kill the micro biomes of the soil and that contaminate everything, including the bodies of people. African palm oil is growing specifically in the case of Ecuadorian Amazonia and other monocultures like naranjiza, which is a tropical fruit from that area. It's delicious, but unfortunately it's being transplanted to areas where it doesn't naturally grow, and that is coming with a lot of agrochemicals. So I guess that the main question for me, beyond the technological, the agro-technological aspects of this, are really economic, because our whole economy is designed for monocultures, and economies of scale depend on the production of one crop and then the whole value chain for exports of that one crop. So in order for this type of polycultural systems with 50 to 75 species to thrive, the question is, how do we approach, depending on the market scale, of course, but since we live in this, in this global economy where the scales of the market sometimes are literally huge. How do we handle volumes? How do we handle the quote unquote efficiency of the production of polyculture? Because it does feel like the economic system is designed for monocrops. And that's for me the toughest part. I feel the ancestral knowledge is there. They know how to do it. They're even in some cases turning pastures into incredible polycultures again by replanting from the primary forest. That becomes sort of like the source for the recolonization of areas that have been completely degraded. And eventually 5, 10, 15, depending on the degree of degradation of the land and the conditions around it, up to 25 years, but starting with 5, you have a chakra springing back into life. So the question would be, what's next? How does this chakra have a chance economically in a global system that does not privilege polyculture, but is designed for monocultures?
It's so unfortunate that we can't hear from Dr. Boa because this question of scale is something he deals with a lot. I'll pass it over to you. And he actually finds that his farm is actually more productive than monocultures.
Absolutely.
Like, and even if you consider them within the same unit of time.
Yeah.
And then when you actually compare it over 25 years, the productivity of these polyculture farms are actually through the roof.
Yeah.
Relative. So it's
I think that has been definitely proven that they're much more productive. But the challenges that Amazonians are facing are commercial. So they produce much more in 1 hectare of land.
yeah.
But when there's
How do you
demand just for
commercialize it?
manure or just for these or just for that, just for Wayusa, for example,
Yeah, the
then,
market.
you know, that changes the equation, that the productivity of the whole is immense. But if only Wayusa is being bought from them,
Yeah,
it may not be enough production.
yeah,
So they tend to shift back to the monoculture.
yes, yeah.
We see these oscillation, which I think is extremely complex.
Yeah, you're bringing up something really interesting around our markets also being more diverse in demand. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Chong.
I was gonna ask, how does the government use the rhetoric for like them to say, if you don't produce, then you know, the next
This was in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. I don't think that's happening as much anymore. They have finally, thanks to science and, you know, satellite mapping, biogeography, scientists have demonstrated that biodiversity in indigenous areas is 35% more, you know, greater than in other areas. And finally, the government is acknowledging that the indigenous peoples know better and that these don't need to be monocultures. But I don't think they're ready to design policies that facilitate the economic, commercial aspects of these systems because they haven't been designed for them. You know what I mean? I would say that policy in Latin America is shifting towards forest resurgence, bioeconomies, but not monocultural bioeconomies, or at least many are trying to shift in that direction. So we are encountering, you know, questions such as that. I don't think we're not back to the 60s. This happened in the 60s and 70s.
So
it's clear to me.
land ownership now ties to what?
There are many different types of property regimes, but I would say the indigenous peoples prefer communal land.
And that's
there's also privatization, of course, and there are areas that are public, like national parks.
so the indigenous system, is that like small scale ownership by families, or is there's basically a communal leader that has jurisdiction and says you can have from your family this amount of land?
I guess it's probably similar to Africa in the sense that there is a sense of right of use, so to
Okay.
speak, as we would say in the Western world.
Yeah.
In the sense that the land really belongs to the family that takes care of the land. If that family moves, then the land that they're taking care of in the next move, and that's important in Amazonia to let the land rest. So I feel that's another layer that we need to involve with these like new policies for production.
Yeah.
There has to be some form of rotation.
Yeah.
But because because ownership, quote unquote, is really based on the cares of the land, it varies traditionally a lot. But as Amazonia has been enclosed and privatized,
Yeah.
of course, indigenous peoples want to protect themselves, so they're trying to fix ownership. And what they're creating is, at least in the case of Ecuador, títulos globales, which are like global titles. So they keep their JACTA system in terms of like one extended family taking care of one area, another one of another one. And it's the system of interconnected communes through which, quote unquote, resources, let's call them, but let's say all sorts of energies circulate, including intermarriage. And, you know, it's not just transactional. And that is still, I see it still active in Amazonia. It's the system of national planning that very often forces them to urbanize. Because otherwise they're invisible to the government, so they don't get funds. So even that needs to change. The whole paradigm needs to change. To accommodate this.
I have a related question also about push for monoculture. by the world system, because when I was researching on pineapples and plantains, I noticed like a big part of it is for export. But then recently there's like a lot of different certification process for export, especially for Europe in the market. And then to fulfill the criteria to get certified to produce or export to Europe, it requires a lot of things, and it's really expensive to go through the process. So farmers who would go through the process, they have to like change their farm, a lot of things to cater to these criteria specifically for that crop.
Yeah.
So that also pushes not only monoculture, but also like large scale. So like a lot of smaller holders cannot survive. I don't know if there's any way to counter that right now.
I completely agree with you. It's very frustrating because these products are being sold as fair trade, and they're also being sold as green. When you see what's happening on the ground, it's like neither fair nor green. It's terrible. And I think it's related also to what you mentioned. There is also a certificate issue. Like for example, in the case of the quichua in Ecuador, the last case I saw of this plantation impetus was that they have their chakras, but then someone, these like brown students discovered Guayusa. So again, discovery.
Yeah, that's true.
And they decided that they're going to start commercializing Guayusa tea because it has a lot of caffeine, but it doesn't cause the problems that coffee causes. So it was a great substitute for coffee. And this tea is amazing, Guayusa. So they started commercializing Guayusa. You've probably seen it. It's in Whole Foods. It's everywhere. Runa Tarpuna is the brand. And these students had great intentions, like most of us do. They wanted to, support Quechua peasant communities because they do need resources like any family in the global economy. And they wanted to support the chakra system. So all their intentions were the right intentions. Nevertheless, they ended up triggering huge Guayusa plantations in the Amazon. So when you look at that case, you start wondering why. And it's funny because I'm writing about it right now. So I actually have the book of Tyler Gage, because I also had to read his point of view. I know the point of view of the Quechua, who were very angry actually.
Yeah.
Because the pandemic hit and they had lots of hectares of Guayusa and they couldn't feed themselves. So they were like, why did we abandon, the chakra of our ancestors, which fed us, even in the worst of times, talk about resilience, for this Guayusa promise of wealth and well-being, and now we are hungry, and the trucks with food from the Sierra are not coming, so what do we do?
Yeah.
And they're going back to the chakra system.
Yeah.
So reading these, Fully Alive is like, this has been like sold thousands of copies, great guy. I mean, you read this and you fall in love with him, it's all the right things, but in the land, it's gone wrong.
Yeah.
And then you start wondering why, how did these great intentions become precisely what he never meant it to become? And that has to do, that's why I'm so worried about the economy, the way the economic system works, the economies of scale.
Yeah.
Once demand starts rising for these products, there's a lot of pressure on the peasant communities to produce more and more and more. So they start cutting down their forest and planting another hectare and another hectare and another hectare Guayusa until the price crashes or something happens. And then how do we go back now from that plantation to the polyculture? Stories that we can learn from so that we can start thinking about alternative ways of approaching economically and politically the polycultures.
I think this goes back to, I think Gabby, you asked a question around land ownership when Global Mamas presented, and I think that gets to the heart of the legal and the economic structures that underpin these bioeconomies.
Mae-ling, can I add something? I just wanted to say the situation in Ghana right at the fair trade zone was really interesting in terms of traditional agriculture, because this was an agriculture of scale and it was not subsistence economy, but a cooperative system, which is really special for whole of West Africa. And what the Probo did actually is they cultivated the land as groups and became so powerful by cultivation of land that they were a political factor, and they traded more and more land, scaled up the economy until they were too powerful for the British colonial side, and they destroyed their settlements on Probo Mountain. So this was a traditional agriculture of scale, and what they cultivated was a mixed system of intercropping either oil palm or cacao with food crops. Originally, it was a lot of millet as staple food, but also root crops later. And they worked in groups and also more as cash crops than for their own supply.
It's super interesting, really, you know, because that's the region in which Global Mama's Fair Trade Zone sits. And now it's actually a lot of large scale cash crop farms. So it's really interesting. I think this is a good segue to the next panel of a series of presentations and discussion, really, because I think the question of what does one grow on one site for some level of resiliency, whatever that means, and what does one grow to scale to participate within a larger regional system? And in many ways, the economic, the political, in terms of the legal standing, and the market, distribution, infrastructure, are all things we have to think about in parallel, because our markets, or our systems for distributing, have completely changed. There's no reason why the sort of on-demand, sort of customized, really fast delivery of products cannot be matched to bioeconomies like this, Okay, sorry guys, I'm going to keep time so that we get to the full circle of discussion themes. So Maya, do you want to, oh sorry, Chong, do you want to take it off?
So onions are epic because I love shallots. They are grown, they've been being grown for a long time. There are a lot of different species or subspecies of onions, and they're all widely, they're like garlics, and a lot of spices are like relatives to onions. They're usually biennial, but usually you harvest them before the flowering to get the bulbs. The bulb will stop growing before the flowers come out, and it's best grown after lettuce or squash on the lot from previous year, rather broccoli, cabbage, and cauliflower. I guess
oh, we lost the Zoom screen. Sorry, Mohammed.
So in the 180 day, usually you plant it like in spring, and then the 180 day life cycle around 90 or like 120 is where you harvest the bulb, and that's and from there on, then you have the seed stock and you have the flower, and for eating purposes, there's usually stock there, and it can be like a small number of times to get the seeds for the next cycle. In terms of use, I swear to God that I also picked this because I learned a very cool use of onion 2 weeks ago, but after travel week, I totally forgot what it was, and I only surfaced in my research. Obviously, you use it for dye. You can rub it against windshields to prevent it from freezing.
Are you joking or
No, it's right here. I didn't draw this.
Oh, okay.
I drew the life cycle. I didn't draw this. But you can rub it against a lot of different things, apparently. And a lot of use of like boosting sexual capacities as well.
So there's high value pharmaceutical applications.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Sean. Okay. All right. The next two, sorry for all the movements. Okay. Maya? Oh, God.
Well, it's
is gonna
okay.
change it in a second.
If it's on Zoom, I can just discuss.
Actually,
So, I looked at indigo, and I think indigo is interesting because it can grow in a bunch of different soils. It just needs to be well-drained soil, so sandy soil is good, but it's used a lot to prevent erosion. It also has a symbiotic relationship with soil bacteria, so it can absorb atmospheric nitrogen really well. So it's good for restoring soil health in that way. I was kind of interested in the history of indigo as well, because it's kind of really closely linked to the textile industry and kind of the growth of textiles. So like starting in the 1700s, there was a fairly significant boom that happened along like with the cotton boom. And then in the 1900s, synthetic indigo is developed. And so the production of natural indigo massively decreased. And then recently, there's kind of been this resurgence of natural indigo with the recognition of the toxicity and issues with the synthetic dyes. And I think this kind of ties into what you were saying, Ana Maria, but I think like, you know, with the original boom of indigo, that also spurred a massive indigo plantations and a lot of poor labor practices. And I think there's kind of a question of with the boom of if, you know, this does turn into another indigo boom, what that looks like and how that impacts the populations where this plant is grown. So yeah, it has a fairly, typically like one plant will have 3 harvests. You can harvest it after, you can do first harvest after 90 days. You're harvesting the leaves, not the flowers. And then the second harvest can happen after another 90 days. And typically some of the plants are kind of left to flower, so then the seeds can be collected and replanted. But for the most part, the bulk of the plant for the production of indigo dye is used before the plant actually flowers. I just noted some, even though like material use is the most prominent use of indigo, it's, you know, not edible, but there are the environmental benefits that I mentioned, like the prevention of soil erosion and the kind of restoring of nitrogen to the soil. But then also traditionally there have been some medicinal practices, such as it's good for like the treatment of bee stings. And the leaves have been used as kind of to make a tea concoction, or the roots have been used to make a tea concoction to reduce fevers. Maybe John can jump in and elaborate on my indigo, with your indigo.
I guess just one thing to add is it's also a member of the living economy, so also fix it, take nitrogen into soil.
Fantastic. Okay. We'll be talking about this medicinal aspect, how we recover that in materials. But just so we move along, is there anything that hasn't been mentioned about coffee that you want to point out as well?
I don't think so. I was going to kind of skip over because I feel like people covered it pretty well.
Okay. This is a beautiful diagram, by the way. So for those who have access to the Miro board, you know, feel free to look at that second diagram and coffee as well. Gorgeous. Okay. Is there, I couldn't find, whose slides is this on, Indigo?
That's
mine.
Oh, okay. So Sean, you had 2 regions. I'm so sorry. Okay.
Yeah, somehow mine got split between yours.
So I think this is also is there any cycle or part of this that you want to point out?
I think Maya explained it well.
Okay, you guys are a team. Fantastic. All right. I'm going to open it up to Sasha, actually, because we're right on topic with a lot of the things that you mentioned during your lecture and workshop last week. Christine, do you mind reading out this question? So.
Oh, yes. What material criteria guide the development of bio-based dyes and the bio-based dyes that support biodiversity? So what material criteria guide the development of bio-based dyes that support biodiversity?
Hi, Sasha. I don't know.
I couldn't quite hear that. Would it be possible just to repeat?
Sure. So what material criteria guide the development of bio-based dyes that support biodiversity?
So, okay, great. I have so many thoughts from all of these presentations. You guys are doing great. This is something I think about a lot, just in terms of how many things have been lost because of the Industrial Revolution and particularly monocropping, that there are so many plants you can use both for fibers and dyes. And particularly it's thinking about what in context makes sense, right? So it's about engaging with one's ecology, looking at both cycles of people and plants and caring just as much for the people, right, as the plants too. And then also too, just in terms of criteria around biodiversity, you know, it's interesting because somebody might say, oh, a sunflower doesn't make a good dye, for instance. But on another level, it depends on what part of the sunflower you're working with, what variety you're working with too. There are special breeds of sunflowers like Hopi Black Dye sunflower that have been, you know, the seeds have been saved for millennia, just particularly for dyes and for medicine. And even like thinking about the three sisters and cropping too, you can have particular varieties or types of beans, as well as particular, you know, types of maize or corn that have byproducts where you can still eat the plant and have a byproduct of a color or a dye or medicine or, you know, additional, like the black bean water, for instance, from 2 weeks ago from our workshop. So you could completely cook those beans and still have a byproduct from it. The other thing that I've been thinking of too is just some of the speakers that have come up today and just having managed a dye garden, which is also an edible medicinal garden out of California College of the Arts in Oakland. So we had a very urban situation, and we also did a lot of work just looking at dyes and phytoremediation and bioremediation. And dyes hold a particular middle space between, I would say, like food and shelter. It's that clothing component. So many of the plants that you wouldn't particularly want to eat that you could put directly into the ground, like say again, if it was sunflower that could uptake heavy metals in some of these urban environments, but still become a dye, and maybe not something you would want to put in your mouth, but maybe in that dye process has some interesting effects because you've transformed that material. And at the same time, you've worked with the cycle or the system. So I feel like that's part of it too, is just thinking about regenerative processes and dyes and what are those byproducts that, like, for instance, thinking about coffee trees and pruning and being able to use those prunes as a dye and still getting the coffee and having more output or yield because of that too. Or nitrogen fixers in the soil to grow crops. Like we were working a lot with fava beans as a dye potential because it's such an intermediate crop that fixes nitrogen, and then it all has to be pulled out by a lot of the you know, farms that work with it as a nitrogen fixer, but it makes a great dye in between and before that, and you're kind of processing it and then it can become compost. So there's all of these ways that I feel like, you know, in terms of biodiversity, just considering the plants or the ecology in that process gives you additional ideas as to how to work with the materials and hopefully support the people in the process too, as well as the plants and the overall. But yeah, biodiversity is a huge component of moving past our current system, like for everything, I would say.
I mean, that's such a fantastic point, and it makes me think of the fact that for food or for building materials, you really care about the age and some level of maturity of, it might be the fruits as we've seen, but there's something about the bio-based dyes that can capture any other part of their plant at any time and yield a very interesting color palette. So, you know, a leaf from a coffee or an avocado tree, in year 1, year 5, year 7, can generate a very interesting and unique time-based, place-based color. And that's not something, we think about transforming immediately into value. And what you're sort of describing is a way to do that with color, with dyeing. So that's really quite beautiful, in terms of thinking about intermediate applications. How do you generate value as your fruits or whatever that you need for food or building materials are still growing?
Mae-ling, I have a question for Sasha.
Fine.
And I think you accidentally put yourself.
Can you guys hear me? I'm sorry about the background noise. I just have a quick question for you, Sasha, is that we work with plant dyes as photo sensitizers in water treatment, solar water treatment plants systems for roofs. So when we're collecting water and and the kinds of plants that combinations that we're putting together, we have many different combinations, but some of them are like, very edible, medicinal such as St. John's wort, but also edible such as kale, quinoa, garlic, etc. And we're actually using it for its potential to go from a dye to clear in the sun as an indicator, right, of water safety. And so I just wondered if you could talk a little bit to that issue of the transitory nature of so many of these natural dyes, that they are transitory in the sun and they do fade. And how would you suggest that we can sort of overcome the cultural prejudice against these problems without, or are there that are working well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what I would say is that this world is wide, like the world of natural color, and plants are not created equally. And in fact, Mae-ling and I were discussing this, I think during our workshop, but previously on our Zoom calls too. There are some dyes that actually darken with the sun, right? Some of those examples are like anything that has a lot of tannins in it. Like if you think about tea aging, that's the same thing. So avocado pits actually are going to darken over time. They are not going to fade. They have a lot of tannins in them. Those tannins actually bind better to a variety of fibers, whether it's protein or cellulose. So a lot of tree prunings, other elements, tannic persimmons. So in Japan, they actually bring it out to have that, or in Korea, like many parts of certain parts of Asia that work traditionally with persimmon as a dye, you can coat or paint it directly onto materials. It makes it stronger, it has UV resistance, and it gets darker over time. So even if you just Google persimmon dye, you will see these large swaths of cloth being exposed intentionally to the sun to darken, because it darkens over time. So that's one thing, is that not all dyes fade in the light or disappear. But the other thing too is that there are certain staple dyes, and you have to remember, previous to the Industrial Revolution and to synthetic chemical color, there were options only for natural dyes, right? So the things that we were adding to stabilize them, some of those were extremely toxic, even though they're natural. So that's part of the current trajectory of what we're working on now is modern natural dyers, is how do you detox these recipes? How do you make them appropriate for where you are? A dye in northern Norway is going to act differently than in Hawaii because of UV, and you're going to have different ranges. Some dyes are pH sensitive. So how do you work with that? That can actually be a benefit, not a negative. So just thinking about change as a positive or as a design force. And then I would say thirdly, or fourthly, the other thing is that there are certain dyes that are known for their light wash fastness and color qualities. And so some of those 3 ancient primaries, indigo, madder root, indigo for blue, which there are like hundreds of varieties of indigo, and certain indigos are acclimated towards different regions. So in Oakland, we were growing Japanese indigo, which could grow well in Northern California. We can't grow the tropical indigos without greenhouses and much more resources. So indigo having, strong light fastness to it, that's a reason why it's like known as the best plant-based blue. But madder root, so for the strongest, most light fast red that a plant can give us, and then weld, which is a weed throughout like most of Europe and kind of Central Asia. That's the strongest yellow that we know of, light wash fast. So those are considered ancient primaries, and those in combination can all work together too, because sometimes natural dyes just don't behave like a normal set of crayons or paint box where you're mixing. Sometimes they will have adverse effects to each other, but those three do really work well together, and that's why they're valuable. But there's also like, thousands of plants to work with for color purposes, and they all have different ways they can fold in for different reasons, like whether they're medicinal or they're phytoremediators, or maybe we just haven't worked with them like in context, in combinations. Like it's really a vast world to reconsider. So
that's so inspiring, Sasha, and it leaves so much room for exploration. Almost the question is, where do you start? And maybe it's around this question of scale. What is widely available? And maybe Krili, you can speak to this, versus what do you choose to grow because it's unique, because it might add value. So if we were going to do a dye garden, where does it make the most sense? What crops make the most sense to bring into a dye garden?
Yes, it's quite an interesting topic, because when we designed the fair trade zone, we have like this established fashion production of global mamas, and we wanted to design a circular economy, a circular system. But dyeing with plant-based dyes is not yet a part of global mamas production. So designing the fair trade zone was also designing a place where that is flexible enough to build up and establish a new economy. An economy that should start from the existing local knowledge of plant-based materials, which were in pre-colonial times like the materials you could buy on the market. And at the same time, we have to ensure production standards so that people who buy the clothes also have a blue skirt after 2 years maybe, and it doesn't fade. And what we actually came up with was that we wanted to have a place that is open for experiments and that grows with phases. So in the first phase, it will be a lot about experimentation and evaluation, and we have like this quite large areas of land on site where we can have some testing of species. And we make use of rainwater harvesting to have flexible site conditions. In addition to also produce a neem insecticide on site, and also ecological fertilizer, so that we can test out on site what makes sense for global mamas. Global mamas has as interest species were soon present indigo and also henna. But in this first phase, it should be like a broad variety of species. Also, we have a lot of woody species, which are the traditional dye species in Ghana, like badie, which was used for indigo printing in the Ashanti region. And during this first initial phase, there should also be economic income, of course. So this should be generated also that guests can come, have workshops, test contact dye workshops where they can test also the species. And then in this evaluation phase, to pin down what makes sense with the existing site conditions, which are very special because it's this foot of the Krobo Mountain, very rocky land, shallow topsoil. Coming up then with the most suitable species probably indigo will work well. And having then this transition from the conventional toxic dyes to first an exclusive fashion series, probably it's first an indigo series, where we can start like this marketing of the plant-based dyes and see also how much income one can generate. And then going from the site to activating the region. Because like also when you go to the Salta region, in former times it was all about indigo, and nowadays it hardly exists anymore that people grow indigo. So once we evaluated, or the global mamas evaluated what makes sense for their production, and this is not only the existing old knowledge, we want also to join like traditional dyers who still practice plant-based dyeing with international knowledge, invite experts, for example, from India, where there is much more plant-based dyeing still, or is present, and also meets production standards which can be marketed. And joining these two is like this idea, and produce maybe a whole new type of plant-based dyeing that fits to the site, to the local landscape. It's an experimental approach, and for me, most fascinating is also that plant-based dyeing is so hardly existing anymore. So you find indigo dyeing in Dabuya in the north of Ghana still at one location, one family does it. I think our printing is also more like to show for tourists in close to Kumasi. So, but still, the oral knowledge. I'm sure so many elderly people in their youth practice plant-based dyeing, so there is oral knowledge present, and it's just inactive because they don't do it anymore, because there's no market, because it's if we generate the market, if we have the demand, people also will start doing this again if they can sell and earn money. And this would be the idea, to activate the region and bring back and the plant-based dyeing. And one of the main reasons, of course, during designing this fair trade zone was waste management. Building up a circular economy means also dealing with waste, and the toxic dyes are the factor which are very difficult to manage on site or a circular economy. And then, of course, it comes to marketing of how one can sell this, because in Ghana, people buy what's most cheap. But we also were looking into more like when you market it internationally, to join like this medicinal aspect, that most people, most clothes they wear are toxic. You wear toxic, you wrap your body in toxic material. And like there's this Ayurvedic notion, Ayurveda, that for example, the local indigo species is also medicinal, is actually something you treat your skin with to heal it. So has also very interesting potential for marketing.
Yeah, I totally hear you on the marketing and a new audience, and how we might tap into modern e-commerce, e-distribution systems to reach that market. Thank you for that, Curly. I think there's a lot of points in there, and that's going to segue really nicely into the last discussion. So we'll come up, bring that topic up again, like, you know, how do we create unique product identity, and how might that tap into either building on the traction that Global Mamas and Equilibri have with their existing markets or communities, and how do we develop new ones? So the last set of presentations, I guess we'll start with Jinri. You're ready.
So the first plant I chose is avocado, and I think
Can you speak a bit louder?
yeah, I think the most interesting part of it is the seed can be used as biodegradable plastics, and research more about the company who developed this leaves and Australian series developers, and what they have done is they make the process of making this plastic cheaper and more efficient. So it can replace the existing like a lower budget and also it's more sustainable. And then
Jerry, would it be possible to move a bit closer to the microphone because on Zoom, we're having a bit of trouble hearing you.
Sorry.
I think the problem they have right now is like how they can make it colorful, like they can't dye it right now. Yeah, so the product they have is only white or like they add some like other materials such as like maybe the seed from the squash or the seed from sunflowers, but that doesn't change the color of it. So the second thing is that this product only lasts for 6 months at most. So after 6 months, they have to get rid of those products. So if they want to sell this to like international market, they need to think about how to make it longer, like last longer.
Mm. Or match it to applications that don't last more than 6 months.
Yeah. Yeah, but because the
Yeah.
selling point is that they can use those for
Over and
like
again.
dining, yeah, and
Got it.
also containers. So
Yeah.
yeah, but a container like only lasts 6 months. It's not very good.
Unless it's biodegradable packaging.
Yeah,
Right. Or airplane packaging. Airplane
yeah.
food.
Yeah,
No,
I saw on their
super
website they only sell it in the restaurant and also like the supermarket.
Got it.
So yeah, maybe they can sell on the plane.
Yeah, oh my God. That's the aviation industry.
Yeah, and the second plant I look at is squash, and I also look at the how they made squash into biodegradable materials and fuels. So I think the first thing, the biofuel is very interesting because they can usually they use squash for animal feed, and then they develop this kind of biofuel which can be used. It's still developing, but they can replace I think alcohol or like gasoline in the future. And because a lot of squash is actually like wasted during the festivals and also other activities. So they can collect those squash leftovers and then make them into like more sustainable fuel that can be used in the second time.
Mhm.
And also they are now developing the biodegradable. It's not plastic. It's like between the plastic and a kind of cloth. So it's kind of material that can be used for clothing and also making like the surface of furnitures and like sun panels and insulation panels using the squash seed and also the squash peels. So I think that may be like a future application of the byproducts of the squash because we eat the center, but we don't use the seed and the peels. So
Peels,
yeah, they can turn those into like decoration panels and also like biodegradable furnitures and maybe product design things.
Very interesting. Yeah. Thank you for focusing on the biodegradable state of the art of these. Okay. Awesome. Monica?
Over here, if that's okay.
Yeah, and I'm gonna.
All right, so I chose to look at amaranth and avocado. Won't really go into avocado because it's been thoroughly covered by my classmates. But I'm really interested in these crops coming from, so I'm actually a student of the environment and business. So thinking about different commercialization pathways for waste materials without impacting like food sovereignty and subsistence for farmers. I took a great class last semester, the anthropology of smallholder agriculture, that really helped me understand the impacts of the green revolution and like the global north, like imposing trade regulations that basically really negatively impacted countries in pushing more export crops. So keeping that context in mind, really interested in these two crops because of their potential to be used both for food and non-food, potentially simultaneously. And also avocados, I did a project at work developing a supply strategy for a large a restaurant chain. So I know a lot about the downstream, but not the upstream. But amaranth is really interesting because it is packed with nutrients and it's really fast growing, but also traditionally seen as a weed in a lot of the world, or it doesn't have like the prestige that a lot of other crops have right now. So in my mind, that means there's a lot of potential for additional like marketing, but it's really gorgeous. Like the first time that I saw Hopi red dye amaranth, like I was blown away because it's just bright red, and they grow like tall. But they're fast growing. The leaves can be harvested throughout the lifespan of the plant. And most people either grow it for the leaves, which can be like stewed, or for the grains, which can be made into a flour. So the leaves can be harvested continuously, but the seeds would be harvested towards the end of the crop's lifespan. And the seeds can be used for like a non-gluten breads and things like that. Non-food harvest purposes, dyes, makes this really beautiful red and pink range of colors. The oil can be used in cosmetic products. There's research around using seeds and foliage as animal feed with kind of mixed results. Bioremediation for contaminated soils, and then looking at extracting like biochar, oil, and gas from some amaranth waste. So I think it's a really interesting crop. Like I said, it grows all around the world, so there is a lot of it. And just thinking about new and interesting ways we can use pieces that wouldn't necessarily be consumed.
Thank you, Monica. Very succinct. Okay. Colleen?
Okay, so the two of the plants that I chosen has already been talked about.
Yeah,
so I'm just
yeah.
gonna briefly go through the process of its growing. So I chose coffee. This coffee is Arabica in Guatemala, and I chose this because I think it's a really interesting plant because it's kind of like the process we're talking about, natural dyes. It's time-based and place-based flavor it has. And the second plant I chose is plantain. It's a very common shade tree for coffee, so I think they can just be grown together. So I chose these two plants to study. To add on the process of coffee growing, I think I may just about the coffee production.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah, just zoom in so that, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So when the coffee fruit is red, it's ready for harvesting. So first the skin and the pulp must be removed right after they got picked. The parts of the cherries are rich in nutrients and are used for composting and making cascarities. I think others have just talked about this. And also in Guatemala, the pectin of the coffee beans is removed by washing. This process usually represents a higher quality of coffee beans. And it also produces a large amount of acidic waters in rich nutrients. Directly discharge the wastewater will pollute the environment. So that's why the plants like plantains, which requires acidic soil, are well suited to be grown with the coffee plantation. And eventually the plantation usually sells substandard coffee beans locally. So that's why they're producing a large amount of coffee grounds too. Those grounds can be used for dyeing and composting and also making aromatherapy. This is really kind of an interesting process. And we move on to the plantains. So compared to coffee, it has a shorter growing cycle, like yearly growth, yearly harvesting. And just as Christina said, the plantain seedlings are transplanted from the mother plant. And after that, it takes about 7 months to start fruiting. In addition to providing shade for the coffee, the plantain fruit is used based on its enrichment of starch and also the slight sweet taste of the ripe fruits. Yeah, like
that part.
Okay, okay, fantastic. Yeah. Yeah, it's the best snack. It's our version of potato chips. Thank you very much for that coming. And lastly, Edgar? Oh, sorry, my bad. Edgar and Julie. Okay, guys, since we've gone through maize, I would say maybe let's go straight to achiote and zoom into what you want us to focus on.
All right, sweet. All right, achiote. The reason I chose these two is because I was looking at the milpa cycle. So you can just keep going. But essentially, corn is like 100-day process versus achiote is 2 to 3 when it's the time when you can harvest it. And this diagram here shows the one on the top right is the milpa and how like everybody already explained it, the squash and the beans and how they grow together. But it's the one on the bottom that I'm most interested in, which is talks about the years. So the first year and like first and second year, that's when you actually are cultivating the land, which is why it's like very short. It's like where we grow the corn, but it's the 3 to like 10-year mark where it gets more interesting because you start cycling the land. And that's when you can start actually growing the achiote along with the milpa. So like Ana Maria was saying about the chaca, I think most of the focus when we talk about milpas are the cultivating of like the food we eat. But if you actually look at it at the bigger scale, and you start including like when you start cycling the forest and agro forest culture, that you in fact are including a bunch of species that you start cycling. And from what I've read, this is essentially like you can't go wrong with the system. It's like it has no, if you keep cycling the land, it basically regenerates itself. And then if you keep going, these are just products, mostly food. But I was mostly interested in the way people are handling the land on the right.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So I went from like growing in the mountains, which is like you take you clear the land all on the left column, and then in the second column it's you start harvesting it, and then you have the slash and burn. But once you cycle that for 2 years, eventually the mountain starts regenerating itself, which is finally the end product on the right.
The long view.
Right.
Yeah.
Just like in Amazon.
Yeah.
I mean, they were related.
Yeah.
These people's were
Correct.
the same.
Yes.
It's also interesting to think, and Dr. Wolf, who was here, would be like screaming at the combustion scene. And it's also maybe the control around combustion is very important in indigenous practices. You never let the fires get, of a certain temperature.
Blue fire.
Yeah.
It's like smoking.
Exactly.
More than burning.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you for that, Edgar. Super incisive, and I appreciate the long time span. All right, Julie, last but not the least.
I also did coffee and underground, so.
Okay, do you want to zoom into anything?
Yes.
Okay.
So because there's already so much information about the life cycle of the crop, I also wanted to zoom out more and understand.
Hi, Julie, can you move a bit closer to the mic? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to look at the process from the farm to export and the process that goes into that. So if you zoom into right here.
Okay. Here?
Yeah. So after the cherries are harvested, the farmers take them to a cooperative or a wet mill. And I think most of the coffee in Guatemala is processed by wet processing, which uses a lot of water to ferment the beans for 12 to 14 hours, and then it's dried. Next photo. And I think something that we maybe haven't talked about is that in Guatemala between 2012 and 2014, the coffee crop was decimated by coffee rust, which brought down the production significantly, like 80% down. And I think since then, Guatemala has been trying to recover their level of export of coffee. And if you scroll over, I think only recently are they trying to diversify the types of crops that they're planting like next to the coffee. So the Federation for the small farmers, coffee farmers, they encourage cardamom and also beekeeping as like alternatives and to supplement coffee farming. And I also came across using coffee husk as a building material, and then the silver skin can be used as leather and also as feed for different types of insects. And then for indigo, yeah, I chose these two because I was interested in their shared history and how coffee basically replaced indigo as the main export in Guatemala during the Industrial Revolution. And this is, so I tried to look for how indigo is also processed, and similar to coffee, it's a very water intensive process. And if you scroll back a little bit up to this image. So traditionally in Guatemala, indigo can be mixed with clay to produce this pigment called Mayan blue. And because of the excess amount of water produced these days for indigo, there's actually research out there that's trying to kind of mimic this process of incorporating clay into the wastewater to produce like a secondary pigment after the initial indigo dye is extracted. So I think it's looking back at these indigenous practices to deal with the waste. Yeah.
Thank you very much. That was our last student presentation. So I'm going to open it up to a range of questions. I mean, there's a lot to talk about. But for our last 2 minutes, does anybody have any burning questions? Or comments from our panel? Maybe just to Edgar's, the idea of the long now and thinking how that might dovetail with market opportunities. Sorry. Juan, did you want to say something?
No, we want to say that the water process for the coffee, it's not.
It has changed a lot
It's changed
lately.
a lot.
Now they use to get the pulp out or the skin, an eternal spring, and then they just use the same water to ferment to get the pectin layer, the clear layer that's against the grain. And that same water that is used several times, several batches for fermenting, they use it to in the machine that takes the clear layer off and to wash it down from a screen because they collect that to make several products that you can use for pectin, and the pulp is usually used dried, because we have to remember that coffee came from Ethiopia and then to Yemen, and they didn't have water to use it. So the first coffee was from the pulp, not into Europeans discovered that they started roasting the seed or the nut, that they called it a nut. But so you can also make coffee from the pulp, but now most of it use it with for composting with Californian worms and to reintegrate into the soil of the coffee plot. That's done by small coffee farmers, not much by larger farmers. Most of the ecologic problems in the coffee production is in larger farmers, except for very few that have look into diversifying the shade, because those that took the shade out, like in Brazil, and wanted to grow Robusta, that is a shadeless coffee, got all their soils washed out. And now they're going back to growing shade and to changing the varieties of coffee for shade coffee that is has better quality. Yeah, the aromatics, everything. But it's one issue in coffee that is present now is that small farmers abandon their crops. And that's something really good about coffee, because it resembles a tropical forest where you have 3 stages of vegetation. So when the price is not good in the market, they you can abandon the system and just harvest some fuel wood from the shade, or avocados. They use a lot of shade, but the native avocados are tall trees, not the plantation avocados that are midget avocado trees. But so the greatest advances in Guatemala is diversifying the shade of coffee into all kinds of different plants for different trees for different uses, and also include some what they call sun breaks that improve the coffee not to get pests from fungus, to have some, like in the natural forest, some larger areas of sunlight. And there they can grow like indigo and many other bushes and plants. But yes, the water and the pollution from coffee before, that they just throw back to the river, all the pulp and everything, and just take the grain, that has changed a lot. That has been changing, and also the issue of diversifying the shade to productive trees. Mahogany, they can be precious woods, they can be macadamia, and there's many tree species that you can use for shade. Yes.
Yeah, and also sadly the indigo, it's not longer existing.
In Guatemala,
even if it's
indigo,
traditional
yes,
variety.
they use it since pre-Hispanic times, since before colonial times, and they use it in the traditional clothes of Mayan indigenous people, and they had a lot of diversity from with cochinilla as well. On the Puntia cactus, they could go from the highlands at 2,000 meters above sea level all the way to the lowlands, because there was a lot of diversity, and also the cultural knowledge of how to use it. And that disappeared with the chemical dyes coming in the 60s. Yes, all the aniline and the azoic dyes completely eroded the genetic resources and the knowledge.
Everything is purchased.
So
right,
yes,
from Mexico, indigo also.
El Salvador is starting to produce a lot. Actually, El Salvador is exporting to India. So you can see that, but it's originally a Mesoamerican domesticated plant. Together
Wow.
with cochinilla. Yes.
No, I mean, thank you so much for that, Juan and Dita. I realize we're sort of at the end of class time. Every class ends this way because we have so much more to discuss. But I think, there's been a lot of really key ideas and frameworks for thinking about how what we're doing on an experimental class scale relates to what's already happened and what is happening. And so I think, you guys have produced really great content, and these initial diagrams and research that you've done on the plant life cycles are going to build up over the semester. You might zoom into one part because you're focusing on taking a byproduct or something that comes one process in this larger life cycle. But I think the key things that have come up is the idea of thinking long-term. How might different actors, based on the fact that we have a range of stakeholders, small-scale farmers to the state, to cooperatives, to private companies that are also generating competitive products, how does Global Mamas and Equilibria, as our case study partners here, compete and enter that market, not only to counter destructive ecological practices, but activate new markets that might mature in different rates over time. So that larger, broader ecosystem is something we've been made keenly aware of from all of our guest panelists. And we'll welcome you back to our second and third panels, even if there's sort of a larger focus on the business value chain or the life cycle design. But we look forward to having you back. I apologize, we can't talk for much longer. And we'll share the recording of this on our website. Thank you, everyone. And if there are any last words, please feel free to jump in right now before we sign off. Anything from our panelists? Renee, Dita?
Well, I just want to say that I think everybody hit on the major points that are important to Global Mamas, looking at the wide color palette. Can this be scaled? Is it light and color fast for the different dyes? Can it be grown locally? and scaled to the region. And then I think somebody also brought up, is it affordable? So that's another consideration to keep products competitive. And I think what really got me excited today too, I'm learning a lot, is, you know, there's plants that we could possibly use for not only dyes, but the fibers, maybe even rainwater filtration, which we could possibly do on site with our own crops, and then even phytoremediation, which we have in our plan as well. So, I mean, these are incredible areas for us to think about. And I'm already thinking about Soil Sisters version 2.0, where we can all discuss how do we take these fibers and make them into incredible fabrics that we can then dye with our natural fibers and then make it available to the world. So yeah, I'm super excited.
Yeah, for sure. And just looking at some of the dye products from Sasha's workshop a couple of weeks ago, we're realizing same dye, different fabric, huge change in, you know, color, you know, performance. So the fabric is something we'll get to eventually. All right. Thank you, everyone. We'll be in touch.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Everybody.